without doubt, I think it's by far the best league in the world.
How dare you score like that in the Premier League? Mission accomplished in the Premier League. The American.
And there we are. We are almost back to the best league in the world. And we are so excited for the Premier League season to come back. For those of you watching for the first time, my name is Gally. I am here with Paul Bickler. We are two of the three folks who will be coming to you each week on the Monday podcast that we do, as well as this American Scouser TV Premier League show. So we figured we would jump at it this week, this year, this season by taking a quick look at last year, just giving kind of a quick wrap up to our thoughts on last season, and more importantly, where we think things are going to go this season. We're going to have a few different segments this year, and we're going to change the show up. But before we get going, as always, please, if you haven't already, give the YouTube channel a subscribe, give this podcast or viewing you're watching a like, drop a comment. If there's something that you think we can do better, please don't hesitate to let us know. We really would enjoy all the feedback that you can supply. So without further ado, Paul, let's take a look at last year's top four. I don't think either of us were that surprised that City ended up winning the league, even when Arsenal ran off to the lead that they had, because we both subscribe to the fact that if you're not 15 to 20 points up, like Liverpool was in January of the year they won the title, if you're not 15, 20 points up in January, you're probably not beating City, because they basically don't drop points after February 1st.
No, they don't. They really just work out those kinks the first couple months, and then they just hit autopilot after the first of the year. It's pretty terrifying. I can't remember a time aside at any level in any league just sort of dominated the second half of the season the way City does.
And the craziest part is when you see this graphic, they lost their last match of the year and drew the one before it and still beat a team by 5 points that they once trailed by 11. They should have won this league by double-digit points with over 90 again. It's just insane.
Yeah, it's wild. Credit to them for putting that side together. The depth is unreal, and they're well managed and they're well-oiled machine for sure.
It's like we talked about last year. They used the least amount of players of any side in the Premier League, yet also had the least matches missed due to injury. I'd say that manager figures out how to rotate. Oh, and they won a treble and got over the hump of the one thing they couldn't win at the same time. Like most clubs have to focus on something like the Champions League and give up their Premier League, not status, but their attention, right? And we're going to get into what I think might happen to Arsenal this year or even Newcastle. But before we do that, let's put Arsenal aside. I think we're going to talk about them a lot during this pod. How would you sum up Erik ten Hag's first year at Manchester United?
I think that's a wild success given the hand he was dealt. Coming into that club, the disorganization, the dysfunction from the core of that club, I think that's a pretty admirable job. It's a really tough position to come in and deal with what he had to deal with from an organizational standpoint. You throw the whole Ronaldo thing into the mix, which is just an absolute nightmare as well. I think he did about as good as you could possibly want a manager to do in that situation. If you're a United fan, you got to feel hopeful for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, I'm with you there. The only kernel of one thing that maybe would have made it a great season, in my opinion, if he could have used some of his magic to rekindle Jadon Sancho and gotten him to look like the player they bought, or if he could have rekindled some of that Ajax magic to make Anthony not look like the troll that they bought. I could honestly argue that team succeeded as well as they did with those two players And honestly, both of those players probably should be behind Garnacho and even like Hannibal after the performance he put in the other day. I mean, he looked really, really good. He's looked bright all spring. I mean, he's an absolute disgusting human being.
They've got that kid Police Street too, who's looking really good in the mids. Yeah, they've got some good young talent there.
Not even talking about, Diallo, who might end up being the next great United winger. And it's just listen, if you're a United supporter right now, and we're Liverpool guys, so it's nothing that we're excited about, but you should be excited. You should be raring to go. And then lastly, before we talk about the teams that got themselves relegated, what else can we say about Newcastle and Eddie Howe other than wow?
Yeah, just an unreal coaching job. I mean, so we knew that Eddie Howe we knew that he could fly, right? We knew he could get teams attacking. We saw it when he was at Bournemouth. What we didn't know is that he knew how to organize a defense like that. And that they were defensively the best team in the league for about 2/3 of the year. It has just been unreal what they did. They've got a new, like Kevin Trippier coming back into the fold, gives that team a new dimension. Ramirez is the glue in that side that holds it together. Eddie Howe single-handedly rejuvenated Joe Linton's career by moving him.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable coaching job just from the floor up.
And honestly, to get what he got out of Miguel Almiron, and then as soon as he started to fall off, instead of like burying him on the bench or just rolling him out there to get tired, he gave him a break. And by the end of the season, he was really refreshed and giving him more great play. It was beautiful. And then, the way he managed the minutes between Isak and Wilson, keeping two strikers healthy and happy all season long. Really impressive. It's really impressive. And I do think that the defense was great and the awareness of it. But the guy who didn't get enough credit last season for their success is, you could argue that Nick Pope might have been the most consistent keeper all season long. And it's too bad. And it's not too bad because the world is you got to play out from the back and you got to play with your feet. But it's almost too bad that maybe the best shot stopper England's had in a good 20 years can't get a sniff into the England side because he's a goalkeeper from the 90s. But he's a goalkeeper from the 90s that just went to Newcastle and has taken them to the Champions League. And I'd say he was probably right up there with Gamarish and Trippier as like the third most important person in that side. So really exciting things. And we will talk more about Newcastle, I'm sure, as we do our previews. But you can't talk about the teams who finish in the top four without talking about the teams who go down. And maybe it's just a Liverpool supporter in me. I needed this graphic to at least show four names. So I brought Everton in their survival discussion as well.
So it was close enough they deserve to be on the board for sure.
I mean, it just drives me crazy. I genuinely believe we'll talk about the different sides. So of the four teams on this screen, right? What of this shocked you the most when it came to an actual relegation?
Honestly, it's probably Leicester. I mean, I thought they had enough quality top to bottom in that team to get there. If you're looking at between Tielemans, Madison, Harvey Barnes, they've got really good quality in that side. But of the four here, they looked the most disconnected of any of them. Like, they looked like half those guys didn't even look like they wanted to play anymore. So, yeah, I mean, Leeds, I thought at least scrapped something till the end. I thought the effort was there. But I think Leicester just dropped out of a lack of ambition and just almost apathy.
Yeah, the Leicester one to me is the most shocking by far. First of all, probably the most shocking thing to me is that all three promoted sides were able to find a way to stay up. Because there were times last year that anyone who's listened to our podcast or seen any of my predictions before know that I basically root for Bournemouth to lose and then root for Bournemouth to have pain and suffering on top of the loss. So I had them, I believe, at the beginning of the year, acquiring about 7 total points for the season. I thought they would get 7 0-0 draws.
They bought nobody. I mean,
and Scott Parker was the manager, so it was really just like a good-looking guy in a suit.
Yeah.
But Bournemouth, and then to have, Forest. I mean, at times Forest just looks so terrible. Forest, the opposite, right? They bought every fullback available, and then in January
they got one this year too,
and then bought 2 more fullbacks. It's crazy to me. But I will have to say, I do like the business that Forest did. They found their way to stay up. I give them a lot of credit. Southampton was a huge disappointment and it still doesn't make that much sense to me because I feel like they bought really good young players that other clubs wanted. They had strikers who could score goals, which is normally all you need in a relegation battle. And they had a leader like James Ward-Prowse who actually does a good job captaining a side. But with them, I feel like it was the appointment of Nathan Jones. That period after Hasenhüttl where they went to Nathan Jones. And it just went so bad. And I think when you fire a manager and it gets worse, like when you're looking for a new manager bounce and it gets worse, you're in real, real trouble. And as much as it pains me to say this, and I put their crest and their badge on the screen, it's the opposite of what happened to Everton, right? They never got good, but they got just this much enough better with Sean Dyche. With just enough time that they were able to acquire those important points that they needed to stay up. And I mean, 2 years in a row, and we'll talk about where we think teams will finish this season. Before we jump off this and move into kind of right shift this into this season, of the 3 teams that went down, how many do you expect to come back up? And do you believe one of those 3 teams is the champion of the championship?
Yeah, I think Southampton can win. I think Southampton has a legitimate shot at winning the championship.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think Leicester City does as well, with this caveat that they keep their core young players that are remaining. Like, Dewsbury Hall's got to stay. He's clearly has shown in the first match he is a level above the championship. But you need those players, right? Remember Maddison the year with Norwich where he just ripped up the championship because he was too good for it. I genuinely think Leicester City still has Daka. They can still roll out Jamie Vardy and his old bones, and them old bones can score in the championship, people. And I just think they have enough of the pieces to maybe put something together, but I still get nervous because there's a month left in the transfer window. I'm really worried about Leeds. They fought hard yesterday. But that looked like, honestly, a Norwich team that Farke would have coached in the Premier League because they couldn't defend not one iota, and they could do everything going forward. But I have a sneaky suspicion by September 1st that Somerville and Nanto, I don't think those guys are still going to be there, and I'm not sure Dan James is the type of guy that helps fire you back to the Premier League on your first shot. So I got a sneaky suspicion, Leeds fans, you might have another good long run in the championship behind you. Sorry.
Yep.
So we'll move over now to yesterday's Community Shield. We're not going to talk, Paul, as much about the actual Shield itself in the match. We can touch on it at times through this conversation, but what I wanted to talk to you about were the 2 main new points of emphasis that the referees have been asked and instructed to pay attention to, which is touchline behavior and not tolerating it, and the additional extra time that FIFA used in the last men's and women's World Cups that have really, impacted these World Cups. Let's be honest. We were seeing matches of 105 minutes when you add the extra time between first and second half stoppage times, guaranteed time for goals, and truly trying to stop the time wasting when the ball goes out of bounds. Before we touch on the touchline stuff, We have some quotes on the screen here from Pep Guardiola, who, as you can imagine, was not too pleased with the new rules when they played an extra 11 minutes yesterday, allowing Arsenal. It did feel at some points yesterday that we were playing until Arsenal took it to penalties. But, we have to get used to it, he said. I had the feeling, not because we were winning 1-0, but not much happened to extend it for 8 minutes. It's a good question for the international board and people because they don't consult with managers and players, and we have to accept it with this amount of games. Now the games will be 100 minutes. Nothing happened today, and there was 8 minutes. They extended goals. If the score was 4-3, you put 45 seconds on for 7 goals. I'm going to be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. I'm still here playing. It's a pretty good quote, actually. I got to give him credit. Is this just sour grapes, or do the powers that be have to answer to the fact, Paul, that we've talked about player safety, too many matches, and now we're adding more minutes, and statistically, the numbers will show the majority of muscle injuries occur in the last 5 to 10 minutes, like major injuries, because guys are actually kind of their bodies are created nowadays and worked to run hard for about 90 minutes plus a few breakages in play. Like, do you think this is just sour grapes, or do you think this is something we're going to hear a lot of from all the managers over the next 12 to 15 months?
I think it's good. I think it's both. I mean, I think it is sour grapes, so I think we're going to hear about this a lot. And I think this is just another PGMOL situation where they roll out a good idea, the messaging's poor and the execution's poor. And I think that's the thing is if you're going to do this, great. We got to understand, and the managers need to understand the why behind it. And look, if we're just standard across the board, average stoppages between ball running out of play, corner kicks, dead ball play, if that average is like an 8-minute average a game, and the managers know you can expect 8 minutes baseline on average in a normal game, and then we're extending if there's time wasting and things like that. I think that stuff gets in front of a lot of this because managers understand that in the past we've added 1 or 2 minutes for stoppages in games where there hasn't been a lot of situations. Now we're adding a baseline of 8. So expect on average 6 to 8 minutes, and then we're adding for goals and additional time. And I think that gets in front of a lot of that. And then I think if it's executed correctly, it cuts down on time wasting. If not, I think the time wasting continues because they figure there's just 10 more minutes anyway. I'm just going to time waste throughout those 10 minutes now. So it's all going to come down to the execution of how this actually goes off as to whether it actually has the intended effect or not. And then we have to really analyze and say, was the intended effect to cut down on the amount of time wasting during games, or is it to create a competitive advantage for late goals for drama, right? So I think maybe it's a little bit of both here, right? But I think just I think the problem is there's just a lack of transparency across the board from the PGMOL whenever we roll out anything new like this. And so that's just kind of standard operating procedure from them. And I think you're going to get this as a result.
And I wanted to ask you that specific question as well. Do you feel that this is actually, we used to talk about this on the 5 subs, right? The 5 substitutions was an absolute advantage for the big clubs. You have 5 world-class players, and you get to bring them on, and Burnley has 3, youth members on their bench. So they're never bringing these kids on. Do you think that this is just one more way of the governing bodies to, in some ways, help the big clubs? Because big clubs have the deeper squads. Deeper squads give you fresher legs and lead to more late goals, more late drama, and maybe less draws and less, Roy Hodgson's trying to basically pack it in from the 15th minute on, because that with your time-wasting tactics, you're not only going to have to basically pack it in for 90 minutes, you got to pack it in for 110.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible. I mean, you think about the clubs that waste time, it's obviously going to favor the deeper squads, right? And the teams that seem to waste time the worst are always the ones that are at a disadvantage anyway. Pickford and Everton are just notorious for this, right? And you look at a lot of these squads, there's a lot of these Brentford, really bad at it, like really notorious for time wasting. So, like, I mean, I think it's definite advantage for the larger squads. I don't know if I think it may be unintentional though. I think really they may be thinking this is going to create some drama and cut down on time wasting, and we really kill two birds with one stone. I don't know if it's I don't know. If I would go as far as to say it's an intentional advantage for the bigger teams, but I definitely think it does give them another advantage in a sport that's quickly losing whatever parity it had.
So quickly on the other topic of the touchline antics and behavior, we touched on it tonight in the pod. Arteta got the first yellow yesterday, which if anyone's ever watched NFL preseason matches, anytime there's a new rule, every one of them gets called. There's a whole bunch of pass interferences. There's a whole bunch of problems. And then the season kicks in and eventually it dissipates and it gets less and less. Do you think we're going to see more of this? And is it good for the game to get rid of some of these crazy antics that are happening? Because last year, if you take, Tuchel and Conte, Klopp and the fourth official, Arteta and the VAR machine, David Moyes and that damn water bottle. Like, there were so many instances of like these like touchline clashes. David Moyes and the water bottle still might be the best of all of them. And I still think David Moyes is running somewhere in Azerbaijan or wherever the hell that Europa Championship final was. He still hasn't stopped sprinting to that trophy. Do you think it's good for the game? Do you think some of that drama actually brings neutral eyeballs to the game? Because let's be honest, right? We love the sport, but what do we hear all the time? It's boring. They don't score goals. There's no energy. You got to wait for people to be excited. Like these kind of things. Like, do you think it's actually good for the game that they remove some of that personality from the managers? Or do you think it's actually a deterrent?
I'm really torn on this one, and I'll tell you why. Because I think there's a fine line between entertainment that, we want that passion, right, and abuse, right. And I think I think sometimes that can be a pretty fine line. So the fact that we hold managers more accountable for the behavior on the touchline, I like the general idea behind that. Part of me thinks, as referees in the state of refereeing in the EPL right now, like, just be better. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think part of it's like, just be better, because like there are some times where like you'd see Jurgen lose his mind or one of these other managers lose their mind, and like rightly so, right? I also think part of this is social change. Like, I think part of it is like we're seeing this across sports more in general. I mean, I remember growing up as a kid here in the Midwest in the United States, we had a little coach that coached Indiana University called Bob Knight. And he was a basketball legend, and he would never hold a job for more than 2 weeks in today's market. Because if you want to talk about somebody who was verbally and physically abusive to not only referees, but his own players, like, this guy was out there. I mean, older Americans will know this guy very well, but like, it kind of reminds me of like the way college basketball really changed towards that when he was like sort of in like on his like swan song out of the sport. So part of me thinks this is just kind of the social evolution of sport and how we're more cognizant of it. But I don't know, man, I'm torn on this one.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie to you. I completely agree with you. I think it has more to do with social change. It's not just sport. I think it's also change in general. I mean, we're looking at a world where it used to be, boys will be boys. It's just guys being guys type things. Nowadays, guys are losing jobs over hazing things, which is pretty rightfully done when you read how horrendous these things happen. And God forbid, if you're one of these people who has lost a family member, please don't think we're condoning any of that kind of stuff on this with our comments. But the change is that bullying, which is something that has always happened in all levels of sports, right? At every level. There was the fat kid. There was the kid who played right field when you were in Little League and he picked daisies and did, backflips and everyone made fun of him. Don't hit it to right field. Or the kid who got 2 innings and his dad was always like, can my kid ever get more than the 2 innings and 1 at bat? And they're like, could you just be nice and stop signing your kid up for baseball every year? Like, and I mean, everyone knows I'm all about the children. So I'm the one who is the most worried here. But ultimately, I think that what we're seeing is we are seeing a change. I mean, this morning I watched the England players, right, after the women in England won their World Cup match that they had no business winning, by the way. Nigeria was completely robbed, as usual, when big cultural clubs that people or countries people want to advance, they usually do, which is why they did everything they could to help the United States advance. They just decided not to kick the ball on frame. But the Nigeria team should have got 2 penalties. England wins 4-2 on penalties. And as it ends, you'd think they'd be celebrating. The Nigerian keeper was literally like distraught on the ground. And it was 3 English players that ran over to her, not go celebrate with their teammates. They were actually consoling her on the field. And I think it is a great message for sports that like there are moments that are bigger than you. Like that girl had just played the match of her life. And she thought in her heart, she believed they were going to win that penalty shootout and upset who will probably become the eventual champions, right, in England of this tournament. And there was this camaraderie amongst them, and I think they want to perpetuate that throughout the entire sport. And I think they're trying very hard to change the mentality of the game. So it'll be interesting to see whether they actually stick to it. Because I feel like they may make examples of guys like Arteta and Klopp and let some of the quieter managers that do the exact same thing get away with similar actions. And I hope they don't. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. I will say this. If you gave me the over-under at touchline bans and you set it at 1.5 for Jurgen Klopp this season, I would take the over, and I would make that bet all day long.
Oh, I think it's probably double that.
That means the over will win.
Yep.
So we will go on to transfers. There have been a lot of transfers here. We're going to just touch on a few of the highlights here. I think I know you believe that the City transfer for Josko Gvardiol is not only maybe the best transfer done in all of Europe this year. It may have been the best transfer done in years. I know how much you love the player. City brings in Gvardiol and Kovacic, and obviously they lose Mahrez. Gundogan moves on, and the young goalkeeper, which I don't think really matters when you have Ederson, and a guy who has played every minute of preseason, which almost looks like Pep is considering starting Ortega, which would be an absolute Pep move to just bench the guy that most of our contributors think will get the Golden Gloves. If you were giving City a grade on those 2 in, those 3 out, where do you land?
A-, maybe. A-. I probably A- just because I think I don't know though, because it's so tough. I think Mahrez I get, makes sense, right? I think Gundogan was one of those guys that always just was the glue that, when you needed a lift in the midfield, he was always there consistently, putting in the work and in form whenever they needed a little bit of a boost in the mids. So I just think based on the outs there, I'd say A-, but they're so deep. And Kovacic, I think it's just a super underrated signing that everyone's not talking about. I mean, we talked about how happy we were with McAllister and how much it made sense because he's essentially a Swiss Army knife in midfield. Kovacic is the very same thing. So I think that is an excellent signing. And we all know, anyone who's been around and listened to us or done anything with us knows I'm just the biggest fan of Gvardiol. So I think that's just an incredible signing for them in an area that, when you talk about that team, everybody talks about the strike force with Haaland and De Bruyne and their attacking options with Foden and just a never-ending attack. They continue to deepen themselves with additions like Rodri and Akanji, who's played out of his mind, and now this. They're building they continually build onto what is already a colossus, and it's disgusting, and I hate it.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there, Paul. Honestly, it's a really good move, and I think they've done really good business. Second place team, obviously, was Arsenal last year in the table. They bring in Havertz, they bring in Rice, they bring in Timber. They're working on a few other deals. Obviously, they had some outs in Granit Xhaka. They've let some young players leave on a free. And then I think there were reports today that Matt Turner is moving on. Shocking to me because it sounds like they're going to actually buy David Raya, which is weird because I thought Ramsdale was one of their best players last year, but I thought Raya was the best Premier League keeper. I like the strengthening. Do you think it might be a little too much investment on the keeper side of things?
It probably. I don't know. It's a weird one for me. Like, I mean, I think they're doing what I wanted us to do, though, where they're adding from a position of strength, though, right? I mean, so across the board, I like it. I think you're probably right, though. It probably feels a little heavy on the keeper side for me.
Yeah. So when we look here at, we're going to talk more about Havertz. I know neither of us are huge Kai Havertz fans. He was very good in Germany, and he had all the upside, right? And honestly, if the kid had just done what he should have done, was spend one more year at Leverkusen, they would have let him gone to Munich, and he probably would have found himself, and they would have built a system around him. He would have understood everything from the culture to the clubs to the language, and he probably would have kept his trajectory going. But I felt like England was the worst fit because you got to have a position in England. And he doesn't have a position. And he came here without one. And he had 5 managers at Chelsea, or 4 managers, which is probably unfair to the kid, and a huge price tag. And then his brilliant idea is to cross town, go to a rival who has more expectations. Like, and now he's going to have to start up top for him. To me, it's just, it's a baffling one for me. I think Timber looked really good yesterday. I thought he was really good. And I personally, I'm a big Declan Rice fan. I think he's exactly what Arsenal needed. And I think within a year or two, he could truly be like one of the best players in the Premier League if he kicks on with better players around him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. So let me ask you this, Paul. When it comes to United's business, Onana, Mount. So far, we are also talking about I can't pronounce the kid's name. Højlund.
Danish kid, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that big Dane. What are your thoughts there on what United has done so far? And then maybe we'll touch on some of the plans they have for the outs and other things.
Well, I mean, I think the big thing is the Danish kid feels a little bit like talking about the NFL draft because, like, we don't know what we're getting there, right? So, like, this is one of those things where, like, in my mind, this has the potential to be an A+ transfer window for them, where based on his, like, development and his performance could be a C+ window. I will say this. I like the Onana pickup. They have not liked De Gea, and they have not wanted De Gea for years. Why they continue to hang on to him, I'm not sure, other than the fact that they don't know how to work a fax machine when they need to. The Mason Mount transfer, I love. Most Liverpool supporters completely gave me shit about wanting him at Liverpool, but I love what he brings. I think he's one of the best attacking mids in England. He's English, so he adds homegrown numbers. He can play as a right-sided attacker up front if you need him up there. He works hard defensively, so he can do that too. I absolutely love what Mason Mount brings to this side. So yeah, and they got a decent little chunk for Elanga to go out, and I know like United supporters are really split on that departure, but I think you got a lot going on there and they're headed in the right direction, and I like those transfers for the most part.
Yeah, I got to be honest. Elanga left. Obviously, there's talk of Fred leaving. There's talk of McTominay leaving. Obviously, they would do anything they could to get Harry Maguire out of the club. We didn't mention that they brought back Johnny Evans on a free. I mean, we probably should have talked about the big signing of the summer. Sad part is he probably makes their team better if he's their fourth center back playing in cup matches rather than having to trot Harry Maguire out there. And, it's easy to pick on Harry Maguire, and by all accounts, we do on this podcast constantly. He'll probably go somewhere. Like, he could sign with Everton and do a really good job, probably. He'll probably sign at West Ham and end up being club captain eventually, and probably won't do a bad job at it. I mean, people forget he does good work with England. He needs tactics that fit him. And I think for a short period there, Ole tried to fit his tactics around him because he wanted him to succeed. Because I think the other thing is about Harry Maguire is he's actually a very likable person, even though his face looks like one you want to just punch. But I think from a teammate standpoint, I've never heard a single teammate say a negative thing about him. And when you make as many mistakes as that guy makes and you're the leader, normally you start to hear the rumblings. And that hasn't ever come up about him. And I genuinely think they like the guy to a man. He probably goes, and, when it comes to fax machines, it's too bad because Liverpool would probably have themselves another Champions League trophy in the cabinet had they made that fax machine go through because, well, De Gea would have been in net instead of Thibaut Courtois putting up one of the greatest performances of any single day ever put in the Champions League final. So we don't need to say any more nice things about Manchester United. We'll move on to Newcastle United. In Tonali, coming out of AC Milan, huge upside, big-time Italian talent. I believe he's the best young Italian player, and that includes Barella, Chiesa, the young Raspadini, the striker, who might end up being the best of all of them. But, for now, I think Sandro Tonali offers the most. He is the closest thing to Andre Pirlo Italy has had since Andre Pirlo, and part of that is just really bad hair, and he looks like him. And he probably could dribble a ball while drinking a bottle of Chianti without anything spilling, which is always my favorite part about Pirlo was always that it looked like he played with a full glass of red wine in his hand and it didn't spill. Sure. And yet he'd still celebrate. Harvey Barnes from Leicester City, I think gives them good depth, attacking winger, but he doesn't have enough end product in his game. And then of course, Alan St. Maximin leaves. They release a few other players. Have they done enough for you, Paul, for a team that is about to step into the Champions League for the first time in 25 years?
No, and that's my thing. I expected them to go out and be a little bit more ambitious. Now, I'm with you with the Tonali thing. It's funny you bring up Pirlo because I was going to do the same thing. I think there are a lot of similarities there between the two. He's got generational level ceiling. Absolutely phenomenal signing. But outside of that, I mean, Barnes is a nice, an accompanying piece, right? But I don't think, I expected more. I expected more additions for Newcastle. I like that side, but I mean, I don't know if it's deep enough to sustain going anywhere into the knockouts and Champions League and competing across for multiple trophies in England and the Premier League in the long haul. I really worry about that for them.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, actually. I thoroughly believe they missed the mark. I think Newcastle should have been the club literally on the first day of the transfer window with a boatload of cash for Mason Mount. I would have been first in line, and I would have been listen, Mason, you don't want to go to United where they're just going to, tell you joined a team that was on the way. You don't want to go to Liverpool and, blah, blah, blah. Come here, make this your club. Make these supporters your people. They probably would have made him captain of the side, to be honest, right out of the rip. And say, come here and put a stamp on this. You and Guimaraes could be our midfield that pushes us forward for years and years to come. And it would have been his project. For me, that was a perfect. They're in the Champions League. I'm with you on Mount. He was my number one, initially my number one signing that I wanted Liverpool to get. Because I thought he ticked all the boxes, and he also offered a little cover on the front three for Mo. He can just do everything. But I understand why he chose United. He took the money. It's a huge payday. And like you said, they're having a really good window coming off of the best season they've had in probably since Sir Alex left, even counting the year they finished second. I mean, let's be real. Yeah. They finished second, 155 points behind the best team in Europe. So Liverpool's the next club, finished fifth in the table, made two moves so far, brought in McAllister, brought in Dominic Soulshablai. I don't think there's more we could say probably as two people. They've been great. I think McAllister at the end of the day will end up being the better of the two signings because you have to rate what you paid for him. And I think he's already proven in the Premier League he can do it. I also think that at times, the way I watch him, I think his profile looks more of a Premier League player. And I think that Dominic's going to have to change his game a little bit if he's going to really, really flourish. It's a big step from Leipzig in the Bundesliga to Liverpool, right?
It is, but the thing with Soboslai is I think his ceiling's higher than McAllister for me. I think like the fact that he's so young, and I think that he's already got so much international leadership experience. And that was, to me, what hurt the most about Henderson leaving is, to me, he was the perfect natural succession plan to Jordan Henderson. And coming into a club under Jordan's wing for a year where he really got to understand the player profiles, the different chemistry, the community, all the things that go into being a captain, I thought would have really benefited him. So without that, he's going to have a little bit of an uphill battle here. I think you're right. I think he probably will have to adjust his game a little bit. It'll be interesting to see how he sort of adjusts and goes throughout, but I do think he's got a really big ceiling. McAllister's looking like a Rolls Royce, though. I mean, he looks really good. His last 2 preseason games, he's looked really, really good. So, I mean, love those 2 additions. In terms of the midfield rebuild, those were 2 additions we needed. And then we failed to react to our 2 unexpected departures. So I feel like we're still – I think our sort of top side of this is improved, though, but I don't think we've gotten any deeper, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would give them a C. I mean, I guess you could say it's an incomplete because it's not done. It can't be done. If it finishes now, it's a D.
Yeah.
What we've done so far is a C, and I think if we hadn't lost Fab and Hendo, I would have probably said B-, but it's still not good enough, these 2 players, because we were talking we need 3, and that was counting Fab and Hendo being here.
As rotational pieces, right? So, yeah,
right.
So now we're looking at 4. Like
4, and a defender that we're probably not going to get in. And we've seen a weakness in the defense. So I'm definitely down on the Liverpool summer without a doubt. I'm excited for the season, don't get me wrong. And I'm going to support all the players, but I just can't take it. I would jump to maybe the next big club in England and talk about their transfer business, and that would be Chelsea, except, well, that would be its own 1-hour show, seeing that they sold 2 teams to Saudi Arabia and 1 to Italy, and they've sent out a half a team on loan, and they've signed an entire new roster of players for their managers. So it'll be interesting. I think Chelsea will be the enigma that it is. But for all those people that loved hating on Chelsea losing and not playing well, I honestly think those days are going to be quickly in the distant future, or in the distant past, because the players they're buying are actually young, up-and-coming players with talent that need to be coached. And it's exactly what Spurs did when they brought in Pochettino, and he took them to the cusp of winning a Champions League. And that's crazy in itself. But we also forget that Pochettino got 2 shitty Spurs teams within 4 points of winning Premier League titles. So that man can manage, and he can manage young players. And if he gets his hands around 1 or 2 of these young guys and they buy in the way Dele did, the way Dele Alli did, the way Christian Eriksen did, I mean, people forget Harry Kane had never started a Premier League match until Pochettino said, no, this is my number 9. We're going to start him. And he helped him become arguably, the best striker of the last 10 years in the Premier League. So I am a little nervous because it's one thing when Chelsea is just buying lots of players. It's another thing when Chelsea is actually operating well and run well with good coaching. And I think it's been a long time, but anyone who remembers when Ancelotti was at Chelsea, Abramovich was like, wow, I spend a lot and I have a class manager that wins a lot. This is a good thing. And I don't know that this owner is not going to do the same if Pochettino starts to win. So hopefully for those like me that love for Chelsea to be in pain, it won't go well, and Pochettino will be out by Thanksgiving. But I got a feeling it's going to be a successful few years here at Stamford Bridge. So let's touch quickly, Paul, on a couple of the other transfers that have happened. For me personally, I think maybe the best transfer that nobody is talking about, and over the long haul, I think Brighton absolutely stole a star in the making in João Pedro from Watford. I think by the end of the season, he will be their out-and-out striker. I think he will replace Danny Welbeck as their focal point of their offensive spearhead. Telling that he took a penalty the other day in the first half with Pascal Gross and Matoma on the pitch, and it was him taking the penalty. So that lets you know kind of what they think of him. I have a feeling that they just did it again. Like they just signed an absolute monster.
It's pretty unreal how they're doing this, right? I mean, when you look at, they got Inciso coming up and like who looks like an absolute stud too. Like they're just going in between Portugal and South America and just crushing this thing. So credit to them. Yeah, I knew you were going to go there. I knew you loved that one. I think that's a good one. I look across the board. If I'm looking outside of like the top six, if I'm looking at transfers that I think are going to be really interesting to watch, I think I'm going to butcher this dude's name. Shade, the right winger from Germany that Brentford picked up, I think has the potential to be a player that really makes a lot of noise.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to have to do with whether Thomas Frank gets him in the rotation, whether he hits that rotation and gets some minutes. But I think that dude has all the physical tools and is young enough that he could really be something to build around at Brentford at a time when they drastically need some offensive help with their situation. I think the other thing across the board, so we need to talk about this really briefly. Burnley's transfer window is a football manager's dream. Like anybody who's played Football Manager or FIFA Career Mode, I feel like Vincent Kompany just has been doing video game simulations because he essentially bought 6 studs that are, if combined age, these 6 players are a combined age average of 21 years old. I mean, you're talking all these dudes are between 18 and 23, and they're all supposedly up and coming, very solid players. And then they brought in a 29-year-old experienced goalkeeper, and they brought in Nathan Redmond on a free. Both those players on a free. So like they bought these cheaper young players who have the ability, who have fantastic ceilings, coupled with older veteran players on a free. I just really like what they're doing from an optics standpoint. I don't know if it's going to work, but if I'm looking at this on paper, it is a video game simulation where you're buying cheap young players with huge potentials, putting in veteran leadership as well on a free. I just really like how they manage the window.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think Burnley has done as good a job as you can do in a promoted side to buy both veteran players that give you presence and give you a chance, but also young players that give you a platform to build on, where if they kick on, you might be one of those sides that comes up and is able to keep yourself out of a relegation battle, which allows those young players to actually flourish and play and, finish right where we predict everyone on this podcast to finish, right around 12th in the table. But another one that, and it pains me to say this, I actually love the Danjuma signing for Everton. It's funny, it took him an extra 6 months. They thought they had him in January, and then he took a medical, and then eventually they were like, oh, look, he's signing for Spurs. We thought he was coming to training this afternoon. And that didn't work out for him. And I think it was smart for him. He wanted to move to England. He made the permanent move. He was a good player at Bournemouth, became a really good player at Villarreal. And if he kicks on and, if he could ever play out on the wing and actually give the service that he has in his right peg, and you get a healthy Calvert-Lewin playing in that Sean Dyche style, they'll score enough goals. I personally, I think the 2 years of Everton flirting with relegation, I think is exactly that. I think they've now bought a few good players. I think they've hired a manager that over 38 matches isn't going to send them to the relegation zone. Like, I expect Everton to finish between 12th and 15th and be safe for most of this season. I think Danjuma is a good signing. The other one that I think Villa, once again, solid summer. Pau Torres, improvement at center back. Diaby might end up being the best player bought outside of the top 6, top 5 even. He's an attacking winger that a lot of big clubs were in on. And then, a guy that me and you have loved, but we soured on based on the fact that he quit on a team as they were getting relegated. Yep. But to get Yuri Tillemans on a free, if you get Tillemans 2 years ago, you signed a stud who improves your starting 11. If you got Leicester's Tillemans, honestly, he's never going to get on the pitch because he didn't work hard enough to get on a pitch with Rodgers as manager, which means you are never getting on the pitch with a tactical genius like Unai Emery as your manager. And then lastly, what is your thoughts before we move on and kind of start to wrap this thing up? What is your thoughts overall on Tottenham signing James Maddison? Because I feel like that one has split the opinions. Because for me, probably has as much to do with whether or not Harry Kane stays, whether or not that was a smart buy or just a panic buy.
I don't love it just because I think and this may come down. I think Tottenham's going to play a little bit differently this year tactically. And so I think maybe this is kind of more of a peek in as to what they're planning on doing. I always look at that team and I think its identity is Højbjerg, who is basically a dirty dog in the midfield and causes problems, disrupts, is pretty physical. And I always see that midfield as predicated on some physicality that you lose when you have Maddison in it. So I also think I look at that team and I think between Son and Kulusevski, you've got a ton of sort of offensive minded players. They're wide players that can play in the mid. I just don't know if there's room for a Maddison in the 10 in that system. I think it's really going to come down to what kind of system they play. That's probably why people are torn, because I think if you're in a system that's going to play that way, that makes sense. It's just not something we've seen from Tottenham in so long.
Yeah, and I think that is from how I've read. I'm going to be the first to admit, I didn't watch a lot of the Scottish League, and I sure as hell don't watch a lot of Celtic, just watching them destroy teams week in and week out. So I don't really know what this manager brings, other than the fact that everyone talks about how he's so attack-minded and how he works the ball wide, and he likes to have playmakers in the middle of the pitch. So maybe the signing of Maddison makes a lot of sense, because maybe this guy operates a lot like Rodgers liked to operate. And Maddison did show last year at the second half of the year that, he was really good even in a really bad Leicester side. I still always come back to the guy that when you put him in the English side, he disappears. When you put him around better players, I feel like his whole career, every time he steps up, he almost steps back. At Norwich, he could do everything, and then he stepped up to Leicester, and it took 2 years for it to even work. And you're like, you have guys flying around you everywhere, and you can't make this work. So it'll be interesting, especially if Kane stays. Because if Kane's there, Son and Kulusevski, you have no excuses not to be great if you're James Maddison. So it'll be really interesting. If it's Richarlison, you got an excuse. You just don't want to see that guy succeed. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So we're going to skip over our match of the week this week, which we have as Liverpool and Chelsea. Anyone who wants to know the pre-match or our opinions on that match can watch our Monday podcast. You can find it on our YouTube channel. So we will go into our Premier League predictions as we wrap up this first Premier League show of the year. So, Paul, we're going to start with you. And I'll remind you that you changed your prediction. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes.
Who do you have in your top four? Starting with your winner, of course.
I changed it since last hour when we talked about this. No, I have City winning it. I have Arsenal second. I have United third. Fourth, this is where we struggled. I had Newcastle in there. Looking at what they've done so far in this window, I just feel like they're going to have a really tough go with all these extra comps going on. I don't feel like they added enough depth. So I have Brighton squeezing in here with, I really like what they did in the window. I know that they lost a lot of pieces, but I also think that manager is a world-class manager there. And I think he's doing world-class things tactically with that side. And so I'm going to have them kind of sneaking in and surprising some people in that fourth spot.
I love it, outside of the fact that I didn't hear you say Liverpool's name, but we will we'll move on from that for a second. And I respect that, by the way. You
be optimistic, I'll be realistic, all right? I don't
know. That's fine. It's fine. It can be any istic you want. I will say I have City winning. And I honestly don't even think it will be as close as last year. I think this is a better City team than last year, not just because of Guardiola. I think it's the second year of Haaland. I honestly think this might be the year where Foden kicks on and really shows his class on the side because Mahrez isn't there to block him as much. There's talks of maybe even Bernardo Silva moving on. I still think they'll strengthen, which will be even scarier. There's talks of them signing Matoma and signing like players like this, like just going out and picking off good players from other teams, which won't surprise me at all. And I also feel like it might be like the swan song for Kevin De Bruyne on this side, and I think they just kind of go for it again. So and as much as it pains me to say this, Grealish was so good last season, and he only got better as the year got long. As the year went on, he only got better.
Speaking of punchable faces, oh my god,
it's nothing more. I'm pretty sure there's still a fan in Birmingham.
Vegas more often because if I go to Vegas a couple times a year, I'm bound to run into him.
Well, like you say, if there was ever a punchable face or punchable back of the head, as that Birmingham City fan found out in the middle of the match, you're a real asshole if a supporter not only gets on the pitch, but he gets past 5 stewards and all of your teammates, and somehow he still gets to the back of your noggin, and nobody jumped on him. It was like that guy could have ran off the pitch and jumped back out like he was like himself. Like, it was hilarious. Couldn't have happened to a nicer human with shorter socks. But I do think City wins. Originally I had Liverpool second, but I had to drop out of my heart and be a realist. I have Arsenal second, Liverpool finishing third, and United, Manchester finishing fourth. I don't disagree with you on Brighton. I just feel like, just like Newcastle, Brighton has to go play Europa League football. And I think when you're a small club like them, you have to take that seriously because you can't assume it's coming back again. And it's like those years Everton would make Europa League and go all in trying to get to the knockout rounds, not only for the money, but like Brighton has an opportunity to get to the knockout rounds and like host a big German team that drops out of the Champions League. Like a European night on the South Coast at the Amex Stadium would be pretty freaking cool. And honestly, cool. I almost feel in some ways that they're more built to go deep in a tournament like the Europa League, playing against European teams, than they are playing 38 matches against guys who kick you in the nuts and kick you in the shins in England. And I also think like De Zerbi isn't long for that job. And a great way to find your way to being the Juventus manager next year? Take Brighton to the semifinals of the Europa League. So I'm going to say they focus on Europe and fall outside of the top 4. Relegated teams, I have it as Luton, Sheffield, and Bournemouth. And I don't need to expand much there. I think Luton and Sheffield are pretty much like destined for the drop unless drastic things change. And then Bournemouth, I just, it's not going to be 2 years in a row where all 3 teams either go down or stay up. It very rarely happens. And we've both already talked about how much we like the work Burnley's done so far. So for me, that's my drops. Who do you have going down?
I have Wolves, Luton, and Sheffield. Very similar reasons to you. Wolves, I don't love the £50 million spend on the Brazilian they got. They have a £45 million net spend because they just lost so much in that side, and they struggled last year. So if you talk about a side that struggled last year, lost this much, I don't know. I think there's a very good possibility of the first manager fired, so maybe there's a bit of a bounce back there. Luton, Sheffield, look, you just cannot get promoted in the Premier League and have a positive net spend. You can't do it. I mean, I think Bournemouth probably is like the exception to that rule last year, and they kind of escaped with that. But Bournemouth also had a really, really strong January window that saved them. And I think I don't know if these clubs are going to do that. I don't see that in them. I just think, man, you just can't come up and add and not add quality.
So let's not even go through it. I mean, we both have Haaland as the golden boot, right? Like there's not really a question there. And I think we both have Haaland probably as player of the year because when you score that many goals and you play for the team that wins the title, they write your name on the trophy, right?
Yes, correct.
So we'll skip down then. Who do you have as the best signing of the year?
I don't even remember who I put down now. That's awesome.
I'll remind you. He plays for Manchester City, and you have a crush.
Oh, yeah. Of course. Gvardiol. Yep. I just think that dude's going to be the best center back in the world in the next year or two. And it's not because he plays for City.
I don't disagree with you. He was probably the best. I think he was rated the best center back coming out of the World Cup. Statistically, I think he was second or third last year in Europe, and that's all by proxy because you have to then bank on the stats that go against you when your partner makes a mistake and it hurts your statistical, numbers. So I don't disagree with you. I think he's going to be a great signing. I'm going with the homer pick here. I think McAllister has a chance to be the best signing. And I think the reason is he has the chance to make the greatest impact of any player signed because he knows the Premier League. I think he can hit the ground running. They needed the midfielder, and more than anything, they needed the midfielder that is his skill sets. Now, we got to sign a 6 so he doesn't have to play too far deep. But let's be honest. 2 years ago, Liverpool signed Thiago to do the things they just bought McAllister to do, which is see the final pass that no other player in their midfielder on their team could. And he's already shown it in preseason matches. Like, it's not even just there. It's not only in the locker, it's already comfortable with these players on the pitch. And I do believe, I said it on our pod earlier, you can see the difference of this guy feeding Mo and Diaz compared to feeding, Welbeck and Sully March. No knocks on Welbeck or Sully March, right? But it's a different level of class, and I think those runs and that mentality, I think he'll get better and better as the season goes on. And I think when you weigh in what they paid for him, he will be right up there. And I think there's an honorable mention here. If Arsenal gets anywhere near the title, it's going to be because Declan Rice changed the way they do things. Yeah. And he has the chance to make the biggest step forward, in my opinion, because he was a borderline world-class player at West Ham. And now he's playing with 3 other world-class players. And Martin Odegaard on one side, I think is going to be really instrumental. And for all the good Xhaka did, they just made a huge improvement on a guy who had a great season for them. So for me, I think Rice has a really good chance. This one's going to be interesting. I think we both hate Kai Havertz, so I'm assuming that's your biggest flop.
That is just based on the fact that he hasn't shown any sort of improvement in his game since he came to the Premier League. We've seen no sort of development from him, and that's probably an indictment on Chelsea as well as him. So it feels unfair to put it on him, but I just don't know. I am not sold that Kai Havertz's best position is up top. And so for him to go into a new side and for him to be your guy that you plug up top at $70 million, I don't like that move at all. I just think it's going to be a combination of your output and what you paid. Very similar to the opposite of what you were saying with McAllister.
Yeah, I honestly think if all things were equal and Gabriel Jesus is healthy, I think he would have started in the 8 alongside Odegaard and Rice would have been playing in the 6. Personally, I think that's how they would have went. And just had Thomas Partey on the bench. But with the injury and the fact that, Jesus is always hurt, no matter how hard he plays, and the guy works hard, but it just doesn't work for him. He's just always injured. And it just seems like it's always constantly like a 4 to 6 week injury. It's not like it's a muscle thing that's a day or two.
What am I missing on Nketiah, though? I feel like every time that kid plays, he scores.
Yeah, I just think they don't believe that he can do it for 90 minutes. I think maybe they just think he's a sub.
He is kind of he's kind of wiry. He's got to put on some weight. He's not very big, and maybe that's the the concern is he can't bang in there for 90. I don't know.
So I'm going to explain this one because I have one that I think is controversial, and I shared it in our predictions in our Discord channel. After raving about Sandro Tonali, I think there's a chance that Tonali might end up being a flop. And not a flop long-term. But I think this year could be really, really tough. Because I've watched a few of the Newcastle matches because they were here in the United States and the games were on our TV at our timelines. And there were reports in Italy he didn't want to go. His agents had the right to basically force him to leave because they own his contract. He has third-party ownership. And he knew he had to go too because he was offered 5 times his salary at AC Milan. And they were never getting anywhere near it. This is a kid who's 20-something years old, speaks English but doesn't like it, is now living in the northernmost part of England, in Newcastle, trying to figure out how to get around like where the red wine is and why there's so much brown ale. And it could be great, but it also could go really bad. And I hearken this back to when Liverpool signed Luis Alberto, and everyone was like, this kid's got all these talents, and he had a few great preseason matches. And then about a month in, everyone realized this kid hates England, can't handle the weather, and is so scared. And we got rid of him before we gave him a chance. And he's gone on to be one of Europe's best number 10s, and all we're doing every year is trying to buy a attacking midfielder who makes plays. And I worry a little bit about Tonali, especially as a guy who roots for the Italian national team. Like, that this might be something that sets his career back if it doesn't work. So it might be going out on a limb there, but when I say flop, it's just not the success it should be, because he's probably a top 5 talent import into the Premier League. He probably went to the wrong club.
I think that's totally fair. I mean, most Italian movement, like, first of all, Italians just don't generally move out of Serie A, the young talented ones. I mean, Italians are so steadfastly loyal to not only like Italy in general, but like the provinces in which they come from. They're so deeply regional in that country. I think even the ones that do move end up going to the south of Spain and like some of the sort of like more Mediterranean climates and like just that way of life and living. And so I could definitely see that as a huge adjustment for him. And also like, I think the skill set of him is above this, but I think the Italian game does not translate into the Premier League. Like we have just generally seen that slower, more technical, slower to develop game, which is beautiful to watch, but is very difficult and very different from the way that Prem football is played. So I could definitely see a huge adjustment in terms of like speed of play and lifestyle. Those are all things that factor in, especially when you have young kids. So I think that's a fair shout for sure.
That's just and trust me, I want to be wrong on this one because I want the kid to go on to be, I want him to. Well, and I think if he had gone to a club like Liverpool, I mean, let's be honest, if he had gone to City, it would have been perfect because he would have had a year to bed in, and he would have figured out his way, and tactically he would become better and better. That's the other thing. Like, does Eddie Howe know how to motivate a player who literally like was basically told for 2 years, you're the future of Italy. And then he helps AC Milan get back to like the crescendo and win a league title, get to a Champions League semifinal. And then he takes the huge money and the move. And literally, like, they announced him and he was like holding up this jersey. And you could almost see the look on his face when he held it up. He was like, is this a Juventus jersey? Like, what am I doing? Like, why are there black and white stripes? There's no J. He just looked like a kid who was like, what country am I in and what are they speaking? And they were speaking English. He can understand it, but it was in Newcastle, so nobody could understand it. Manager of the year.
I'm taking the Brighton manager.
De Zerbi's a good shout.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna steal one here. I'm stealing a march from our friend Kazi. And we have made the comment earlier. I honestly think the Premier League voters they never give it to the Peps or the Klopps, right? Because they're like, oh, you get too much money, you spend too much, you're supposed to be good. I think that Vincent Kompany has a really, really good chance to win Manager of the Year because I think they have a chance to be that, side that finishes even like just above the top half. They could easily finish above Crystal Palace and Wolves and Bournemouth and the 3 relegated sides and all the other clubs that are just kind of middling there. And I think they're going to be really hard to play like always. And I think Vincent Kompany knows what he's doing. He's got 2 or 3 more years at Burnley. And if he can prove he can keep them in and keep them competitive and show natural progression, he is the natural replacement for Pep when he leaves at City. And that has to be in the back of his mind of wanting that job. He's a club legend. You know, if it wasn't for Vincent Kompany, they may never have gotten to this level because he gave them the stability and he was the leader that helped them win their first title under Mancini. So, you know, I could see Kompany easily winning that. And then the only other one we have is, I think you already said it, you could see Lopetegui being first to be fired, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go with and I had to actually look down and write the name out. It's Andoni Iraoli. And that is the asshole who got the Bournemouth job after they took a guy who saved their whole goddamn club and fired him in the offseason to give it to a foreign manager, which makes it's just one more reason why I'm not only thinking Bournemouth will go down, but rooting for Bournemouth to go down. Like, the guy did the best job of any manager could have been asked to do, is an intern, has the intern tag ripped away, keeps that shitty ass side up, and then his reward was walking papers to hire a guy who has never coached a top flight match. Unbelievable. Well played, Bournemouth. And with that, like usual, I'll end most shows by insulting the people that root for AFC Bournemouth. But as always, please, as Paul would say, smash that like and subscribe button. We need you. Please join us each week. We'll be posting this somewhere around Wednesday afternoon to Wednesday night. We'll be recording it on Mondays. We'll get a little bit more granular as the season goes on, maybe a topic or two each week. We're going to try to keep it a little bit shorter. We went a little long tonight because we had so much to cover with the wrap-up of last year and the new season. So we'll keep it somewhere between probably 40 minutes and an hour each week. We'll chop it up a little bit and pop it out there on our social media platforms as well. But please, if you're watching this and you like it, give it a like. Give the page a subscription on YouTube. Check us out. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, all of your social media platforms. And as always, if you have ideas or ways we can do the show better or change things up, feel free to drop us a message. We always love to hear your feedback and your thoughts. And if you think I'm right, send that in. If you think Paul's wrong, send that in too. Everybody wins. Paul, anything else here for the listeners as we wrap up?
Sounds good to me. I don't have nothing else. I'm ready for the season. Let's do it.
I was just going to say, everyone, more importantly than anything, from Friday afternoon on, just enjoy that real football is back. We watch the greatest sport in the world. We all know that. We watch the greatest league in the world, even though it does feel a little bit like the advertisers tell us that a little too often. It'd be nicer if the players just actually proved it on the pitch. But let's just enjoy it. Let's banter, get in the pubs, talk lots of trash, and more importantly than anything, I hope your clubs do well. Just finish at least one spot behind Liverpool. All right, everyone. Have a great night. We'll be back next week, and thank you for tuning in.